Welcome to Canvas of the Heart, presented by Free Arts for Abused Children of Arizona. The mission of Free Arts is to transform children's trauma to resilience through the arts. This show is a collection of conversations that spotlight the ways Free Arts creates hope for children and teens who've experienced abuse, neglect, or homelessness. We hope you find this show to be informative, inspiring, and fun. Welcome to Canvas of the Heart, Jaylee. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you. So happy to be with you.
So for our listeners and our viewers, Jaylee is Jaylee Jansen, PhD and Director of Research at Indigo Cultural Center. That title's important. I see your reaction there, but I think it's something that we have to tell people about you. But welcome. And we are raising the bar on what we learn here on this podcast by having you here, and we're excited for it. I'd love for you to tell us about yourself, and then how did you get into things like evaluation and research around programs?
Absolutely. What an introduction. Thank you. So yes, like you said, my name is Jaylee Jansen. I am the research person when it comes to being at Free Arts. So I fell in love with research in college. I loved the idea of getting to tell stories through data and statistics that people experience. Also in college, I started looking at research on race and whiteness, specifically in education. And so that kind of all propelled me to come to lovely Arizona and pursue a graduate degree here. And so I specialized in the way race operates in educational contexts and for children and youth. And so through that, I found Dr. Eva Marie Shivers and Indigo Cultural Center and just fell in love with them and wanted to work any way I could. They are rooted in equity to their core. They believe in healing justice, and they're participatory, so they're community-based. So everything we do is for the community, with the community, and hopefully benefiting the community. And so it's really special as I've decided to stay in Arizona now after graduate school that we have a client like Free Arts in the area who we can be a partner with and who we can also hopefully help benefit the communities that surround us.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that research partnership that Indigo Cultural Center has with Free Arts. And keep in mind that some in our audience will know that we do surveys and evaluation because they've either given one out or taken one. But others will be like, well, I know nonprofits do this, but tell us what all that involves when two groups partner around research and evaluation.
Yes. So I did a little digging, and the first document I ever saved for this project was in 2021. So I think we have been partners with you all since 2021. And we came together to explore, as simply as we can put it, impact. And so through stories and through narratives from children, teens, alumni, youth, that participate in Free Arts, we know that the impact here is happening. And so what we come in to do is to put numbers to that impact, ultimately to try to provide some type of story through numbers or some type of story through a standard process to show not only funders, but anyone who's looking in at Free Arts, that impact is happening and the way that it's happening. And so in order to do that, it takes a lot of effort from our organization, but also Free Arts. We come together to develop the logic model and the theory of change, which is really helping us understand how change happens here at Free Arts. Mm-hmm. And then, Matt, perfectly well, then we engage in the survey creation process, and everyone has to decide what questions to ask, what measures to use. And then we're so lucky that Free Arts has the capacity to help with survey implementation. And so people like Danielle and people like Casey and people like Ileana are here helping us not only design these processes, but actually go out with children and teens and get them to answer the questions we put so much effort into creating. And so, we try to always be as collaborative as possible when we're running an evaluation. And I think that our partnership here is a really great model of that.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I'm so thankful for it. I say all the time that, it's fallen onto my responsibilities to help implement this, but I didn't design it. But what was designed before I got here was so immediately interesting and I think relevant that I'm just proud this work was done, and I'm happy to like be someone in the relay race to take the baton from one part to the other. In your answer, you talked about questions, and I think that's where research starts, with questions we don't know the answers to, which we hope there is impact. And we have anecdotes, stories, right, of people saying, I love free arts, it did the following for me. But research itself is centered around questions. What do you think are the questions that we're hoping to answer by having this research partnership?
Yes, great question. So ultimately, like you said, this like broad question of what impact does free arts have and for who, right? Making sure that if we find impact, we find it for all children and teens. And then our research questions are really aligned with free arts pyramid model. So trying to understand how change happens from engagement in any given free arts program as far as, right, safety and connection. We might also try to explore after participating in camp, how does self-expression and self-efficacy change from beginning to end of the program? And then ultimately, as we get more surveys answered, we really want to be able to understand, after participating in multiple free arts programs, is there change to certain aspects of the pyramid model, like resiliency or like increases in self-expression and creativity? And so our research questions are born out of the way free arts understands their program. So we are full, all on deck to understand the way that the pyramid kind of operates in each individual program that free arts offers, and then broadly as well.
Yeah, one of the things I appreciate is that there are questions, elements of focus that really look at expanding circles of stakeholders, right? There's the participants, there's our partners, there's volunteers, including our board, and maybe a look at the child welfare system itself and what role, if any, free arts plays in that. And so it gradually includes more and more with information about, what's this effort going toward? How could we best channel it? And I think that's a powerful thing about what we're doing. Going back to when I joined the organization, I think I was here a month and I got in my email box an attachment for, at the time, was a proposed book chapter. The book didn't happen, but it's turned into a paper that you're hoping to release. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that project, what you were working on. I believe it was a passion project for you. It wasn't really something that we directly contracted you to do, but it's something that you felt driven to. So could you tell us about that paper?
Yes, absolutely. So in addition to conducting evaluations with partners, we love to get any findings we have or tips of knowledge that we have out into the world, because what use is data if it's just sitting behind a closed laptop? And so a chapter proposal came out for transforming trauma into joy for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized youth. And we immediately thought, free arts, like we have to submit. So unfortunately, that whole entire book did not happen, but we were able to craft a really nice paper. I'll read you the title. I had it written down because it's long. Trauma-Informed Art-Based Healing for Black, Indigenous, and Racialized Youth Who Are Experiencing Parental Separation and Homelessness in the U.S. And so we are still so excited to get this paper now out into the world. And so Indigo is working to co-author it. Matt, you've provided edits on it, so you'll be an author as well. And ultimately, we're hoping to demonstrate the arts as means to transform trauma, to process and heal. And it also serves as a really nice space to highlight the wonderful work that we are seeing at Free Arts and a little bit of the data that's coming out of Free Arts.
Jaylee, when your paper begins, it lays out some evidence known in the field around the healing power of art. And I'm hoping you could lay that out for us, because we talk about healing here as a tagline at that. And I think it tends to be reserved for health and services, medicine. But what we're talking about is a return to well-being when we talk about health. So what ways did your research uncover that art has a unique power to heal?
Yes, absolutely. So always want to be really transparent that I am not a trauma or kind of like art healing researcher, but I do have the talent of going into the literature and pulling out data, pulling out findings. And so in the beginning of this paper, we really wanted to document the research that exists. And for us, it was really quite clear that, yes, art does have the power to heal. It does have the power to cultivate that processing and healing from trauma. And so as we started exploring, we learned that art, engaging in art, any type of art, right? Multimedia, written, spoken, performative, engaging in that process has not only mental and emotional healing power, but biologically can provide healing. And so, for example, engaging in any type of art activity can actually decrease cortisol levels and regulate breath. It can also regulate heart rate, as well as providing opportunities for you to process, for you to practice flexibility and creativity, all of which goes into overall well-being, of course.
The paper doesn't stop there. It sets a platform that art itself has a unique power to heal. It centers us back into the reality of traumatized young people who have had some experiences with abuse, neglect, or homelessness, which is our target population. And then it heads into its major theme, which is looking at some of the unique experiences and I think systemic impacts that are impacting particularly children of color. And so that's embedded in your title. And it says it very descriptively, right? But it's also academic. Can you break that down? What is unique about how the system that is supposed to help and support or intervene when it needs to is also experiencing some interesting unequal impacts depending on a child's lived experience?
So we at Indigo, in everything we do, in every partnership, we look at it or we try to understand it through the lens of racial equity and also healing justice. Our partnership here at Free Arts is no different. And so the chapter, the book, the paper, the paper begins to line out what is the current landscape of youth and disproportionate participation, if you will, in child welfare for Black, Indigenous, and other racialized youth. And so these stats are just a tiny bit outdated, but I want to read them off. So as of 2020, of all of those entering the foster care system, Black youth represent 20%, though they only represent 14% of the population. When we look to youth, adolescent homelessness, the statistics get so stark. Youth of color account for 90% of youth experiencing homelessness. 90%. It's a crazy statistic. And then finally, when we think about unaccompanied minors, Latin American youth account for 93% of unaccompanied minors here in the U.S. And so when we see these disparities at a system level, right, the child welfare system, we don't look at those as, oh, it's personal choice. We think what's happening in the system or happened historically to kind of lead us to this place. And both myself and Dr. Shivers were race researchers. And so we look to history. And we know that there's a long line of history, specifically in the child welfare system, rooted and wrapped around racism that kind of leads us to the system we have in place today. We don't have time to get into that history, but it is outlined in the book or in the paper. So
it's okay to give us teasers.
Yeah, please feel free to go in there. I mean, I loved writing that section. I learned so much. It's incredible. But what we know is the system was founded almost on racism. So how could it not be enacting those policies now? And what we see is actually evidence of the child welfare system kind of rolling back or intervening new policies to kind of make up for those racist harms that it's caused. So we can look at the Indian Child Welfare Act that was passed in 1978, which was in response to the boarding schools. We also have the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act in 1994, which encouraged Black, Indigenous, and other racialized youth to be placed in families that aligned with their racial identities. And then as recent as 2018, we have the Family First Prevention Services Act, which was passed because of how many BIPOC youth were being put into the foster care and child welfare system. And so it took funding from congregate care and instead put it into prevention services and put it into different funds to retain and recruit families of color to keep families together. And so we wrap that all up, right? That's a big history lesson. That's a lot of stats. We wrap it all up to say these youth are experiencing co-occurring traumas. We have the trauma of experiencing race and racism in this country, and we also have the trauma of being separated from a family member or experiencing homelessness. And so we need spaces like Free Arts where youth can come and heal themselves or explore their trauma. But those spaces need to be safe and they need to be informed with a trauma-informed lens.
Yeah, trauma-informed lens, and I think a lens toward the inequities that exist, recognizing that they're at a macro level, they're the way the systems were kind of created and created connections that may or may not be apparent to the people involved. And it's very easy to realize we have mindsets or patterns of making policy choices that have these impacts, right? The data pops out and tells you, like, look at these percentages. That's the downstream. What's going on upstream that's causing these kinds of things? Because I go back to your comment, like, it's not fair to say it's only personal choice. And that's often a rhetorical point, is that, well, this is just bearing out because of poor parenting. Context matters, right? Place matters. In the business community, it's much more common to talk about like the social determinants of health as place matters, like where we live and breathe and go to work, and the nature of our community and our access to resources bear out in the quality of life that citizens have. And that's true in any context, right? Every society has to reflect on those things.
Yeah, and at Indigo, we really try to focus on that broader societal or system level policy change because, of course, we can always look to the individual. But what we find is when we talk about race or prejudice or discrimination, too often we go to the interpersonal when really, what we need to be focused on is what are the big policies that kind of enact these harms? Ultimately, if you're in child welfare, you're a social worker, you're working with kids, you are doing a very hard job. You want the best for these kids, these teens. And so we just find it really unfair to place all this blame down on the folks doing the work. And instead, we always try to shift up to what system level activities or inputs or policies might be cultivating these disparities.
Yeah. And so it can be sobering to say, like, here's the system's view. There are facets that are attempting to do good that run into these challenges too. And I think, social work really was born out of child welfare work originally. It bears some culpability, which in its training programs talks about. And then even now, sometimes is that lightning rod. It's the case manager that's catching a lot of stress from everyone they're dealing with, trying to manage a very difficult situation. As you write this out, you come to a place in your paper, which I think is probably why you wrote it, where you feel like, at least at a level that an individual can participate, you see Free Arts as having some ability to help here. So from the macro down to the program level, in what ways can something like Free Arts provide something uniquely healing and trauma-informed? What did the research tell you about why Free Arts might be part of a recipe of well-being?
Yeah. So, again, we learn alongside Free Arts, usually from Free Arts, about trauma-informed practices and making things trauma-informed. The biggest resource we found was from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration on what components should go into a program or go into a policy or any type of practice to make it trauma-informed. And so, there's a couple different principles and components here. First is just realizing the widespread effect of trauma to understand the way it potentially can be led to a path of recovery. The second here is that in order to be trauma-informed, you have to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in your unique clientele, right? Trauma shows up much differently in a young child than a teen than in an adult. So understanding those unique kind of triggers and symptoms are really important. And then responding fully to integrate that knowledge into not only your practices, but into your policies, into your programming, and then resisting that re-traumatization. And so in the resistance of re-traumatization, you have to have safety features. You have to have the ability for the client, the child, to empower themselves, right? They have to have choice. They have to have trust, and they have to have transparency. And then also that program needs to really have a cultural, historical view of the way intersecting identities might come into play for the trauma as well. Things like gender and race, language, right? All of that might play a unique role in becoming trauma-informed. And again, this is what we learned from the research. I think we've learned so much more from watching Free Arts do this in practice. You all are great at it. You're the experts here. But that is what the research is pointing us to.
Yeah, I think it's fair to point these out because there are intentional choices we make in the way that we program, the way we relate to each other as staff and volunteers, that for some out in different contexts feel like are rhetorical choices, right? Like giving a lot of space to understand that an individual is really a complex set of identities, of experiences. There's some historical, and I encourage you to read the article that comes out for our listeners and our viewers, because that history itself is important, because we find ourselves on the receiving end of whatever history we live in, wherever we are, right? And so the intentional choices here are coming from what we hope is a research-informed viewpoint. And when we encounter that we are not as effective as we'd like to be, or in some cases, this is not true in free art, but there are moments where an effort actually produces the opposite result. You have to kind of go back and say, what is causing this? How do you modify this? How do you change this?
And what we've learned through our partnership with you specifically about the way trauma shows up is that things that you would think are normal, standard, are not, and you have to really consider them in a unique way. So, for example, when we were developing the first surveys here, we sought out help from teaching artists to give us feedback. You know, how would this feel if it was implemented? And words were getting flagged as like, this is potentially traumatizing, re-triggering, etc. Things that, to me, I just would have never dreamed of, like, I can name things about me that are good. Well, the use of good has the opposite effect of bad. And so it's not that that question is inherently wrong, but we had to be really careful in our surveys that they wouldn't create a trauma response or trigger something in which the child or teen's brain would kind of shut down, because that's what happens when you're re-triggered, and then they wouldn't be able to finish the survey. Ultimately, we don't want to cause any harm either, but we also want to get through the surveys. Like, that's our secondary. And so we learned so much about the need for specific language, the need for really considering all elements of even just developing a survey to be really trauma-informed in order to be not only effective as a data collector, but to be meaningful to the work that we're doing here with you all.
Near the end, you touch on some major themes that I think you're hoping to present out for consideration in the wider world. So I want to read 3 of them that I picked up and just have you share a little bit about each. But one was family and strength of relationship, conflict resolution and building trust, and the concept of art as healing. So can you walk us through those?
Yes, I'm going to walk you through the findings. I love it. This is my favorite. So I'm going to talk about those 3 themes, but I want to step back a tiny bit. right before we present these beautiful themes that came from conversations with alumni and staff and participants, we display some quantitative findings, which means numbers. And they're really impressive. We looked at every element of the pyramid, from safety and connection all the way up to resiliency. And what we found were the scores were incredibly high. All of them were above a 4 out of 5, which is amazing. And we didn't find statistical differences when we looked at those scores for Black children and teens, for Latin American, for white, for Asian, etc. Usually in research, you want to find statistical significance. But what we find here is that it means that free arts is functioning the same for all the children and teens that are participating. They're all experiencing the incredible benefits that come with participating in your program. So I just have to highlight that because I think it's fantastic. And so once we kind of have this numeric data, we want to explore more. Well, why? And so that's when we facilitated those conversations to understand what we call more nuance in the data. And so we code it and we come up with themes or broad kind of statements that categorize the topics discussed. And so the first one we titled Family and Strength of Relationship. And this was so interesting. It wasn't that free arts is like a family. It was that free arts is my family, which is a really important distinction, that the children, teens, alumni, staff felt like free arts truly was their family. It was taking on that role in their life. And so it fostered these strong bonds of connections, particularly with adults. And what we found was that who the adult was really important, or highlighted as really important. That diversity in staff's race and staff's language they spoke and their lived experiences really contributed to feeling connected and feeling that family tie. And so for lived experience, youth really connected well when the adults in the room also had similar experiences to them. They either were in child welfare, they experienced homelessness, maybe they were an unaccompanied minor. So being able to see yourself in an adult around you who is well-adjusted and doing great and who is an artist was really important in cultivating that connection. I have a quote here I want to read from an alumni. I barely survived adolescence. Being part of this solution is paramount to me. Being at the programs and modeling a loving relationship is so important to show the kids that they can go through hell and it doesn't have to dictate who they are. That trauma doesn't have to define them. It's just such a beautiful quote and sums up the way the mentors, I think, show up in the programs to really create those connective ties.
There's so much wisdom in hearing someone's reflection on a design they had no part in and may not have understood why they were in it, but they feel the products of it. And to see that journey in the statement from I survived, I barely survived, to a sense that I experienced modeled relationships, something a lot of people take for granted, that the models of their relationships in life have been protective, have been positive, largely. No one's perfect. But it's something we think about and reflect on here, that even in our staff interactions, are we modeling the behavior that we would want to model to participants? Because I think in the end, that makes us better humans.
Absolutely. When we moved to our second theme, which was conflict resolution and building trust, we heard so many mentions of camp series. And so camp is, where multiple children and teens come from multiple spaces and places all together, and they work towards this end product, maybe a presentation or a performance. And so there was a lot of discussion about how engaging in that group process really cultivated the opportunity to disagree in a safe way around adults who could also foster that experience. In addition, we had participants in these groups illustrate how multiple participations in free arts programming, not just one time, but over time, continuing to engage, really helped refine these skills of, advocating for yourself, conflict resolution, building trust. I have another quote because I love to just allow the participants to speak for themselves. This person said, the longer you participate in the programs, the more perspective and knowledge you gain from learning from others around you. You meet and communicate with a lot of people through free arts. You learn to understand their points of views, ideas, and experiences. This helps you navigate all of your environments and the social world.
I love it. And that really does speak to what we're aiming for, right? So to have somebody in an unsolicited, open-ended question give us that destiny of, the outcomes that we would want in our participants, it's awesome.
And that's what, from our conversations, free arts means by skill building, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't a traditional arts program where we want people to improve their paintbrush strokes. The whole mission here is skill building here around the ways you interact with one another, the ways you communicate, the ways you regulate. And so these conversations were really illuminating exactly what we hope to find through the data as well. And so our last theme was, of course, art is healing, which we've talked a little bit about. And so we heard so much on this, so much so that it's almost overwhelming the different ways that free arts seems to enact healing on each individual person, like unique experiences all around, because obviously our traumas are all unique. And so we heard things like getting me out of my comfort zone, learning to use art as a coping mechanism, allowing myself to become comfortable with my voice, allowing myself to take up space so that then I can advocate for myself when I'm away from free arts, which I thought was just really special, this idea of advocating for oneself, especially in the child welfare system, where so much is decided for you or placed upon you. And then finally, we had group agreement that when youth are able to tell their story out loud, that it helps to process that unique event, and it allows you to practice things like bravery, safety, and self-acceptance.
Right. Back to the core values. And I think it's important here to point out to our listeners and viewers, there are not workshops in free arts that tells you to be more of a self-advocate. This is modeled behavior where in the environment, they are able to cope with the stress of a manageable risk of using their voice, of communicating their need, their want, their boundary, and then having that met with someone who takes it seriously and it has that exchange with dignity. And listen to the quote, those are internalized. Those are not talking points we couldn't give because there's no direct instruction in a classic school sense about these things. It's felt. It's felt in the environment.
Yes, absolutely. It's coming through a fun experience, really. We got to bucket drum at the conference last year, an entire professional artist series of bucket drumming, but you're finding ways to find out your own identity, to process anything you might be feeling by slamming the drum down, And so it's really such a special intervention.
Yeah, the drumming's funny because I run into adults now, even one recently that was there at that and was like, it got stressful. And how'd that feel? Right? To be in a safe environment, to know that the sequences we were following as a group got a little more complicated. And there was a complete safety net around. No one was on the spot, but those feelings of can I do this? Can I, tap on the neighbor's stick at the right moment? It communicates to what it's like to try something new when you're not sure you can do it. And that's what we're trying to model as a feeling of success and accomplishment. This has all been great. I love all of the information that you're providing. We want to put you on the spot a little bit with something new that we're trying with our guests. So I am bringing up our whirl of fun.
Woohoo!
So this wheel is made up of our value statements and also elements of the pyramid. So by randomness, I assure you it's not rigged. Go ahead and spin the wheel, and we're going to ask you a little bit about your experience with one of these.
All right, here
we'll do this once or twice.
Okay.
So bravery, that's a core value at free arts. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about a time that, to your level of comfort, you had to demonstrate personal or professional bravery and what helped you demonstrate that.
So my husband and I, don't know why, decided to take a vacation to Hawaii And instead of vacationing in Hawaii like others might do, we decided to hike the Kalalau Trail, which is one of the hardest hikes, I think, in the U.S. And I'm deathly afraid of heights.
I join you there.
Yes, there's a ledge that if you fall even a tiny bit, you're going straight into the ocean, and it's a very large fall. And I truly couldn't do it. I was like almost crying. I had my hiking sticks and they're shaking. And
First of all, this sounds like an awesome vacation. So,
I wouldn't advise it.
Don't advise it.
I don't advise it. I came away with a blister on every toe from that hike.
Okay.
But ultimately, we, took one hiking pole at a time, got across it. But then my bravery was challenged a second time because I had to go back the same way we came in the next day. And so what I did find is the second time around, I didn't cry and I didn't shake as much, right? I was doing it for a second time. And I think maybe that speaks to how scary doing something new is, especially something that is either triggering to your brain. For me, it's heights for sure. So that's my tiny story.
Awesome. One more.
All right. Strength. All right, this one's easy. Yeah. So currently I'm pregnant and, a lot of times we think about strength as physically lifting or physically finishing the hike. I'm experiencing getting to practice strength that comes from something kind of operating inside your body that you don't have much control over, right? Nausea and different other symptoms that we've had. And that's a whole different experience of strength. It's not one that we talk about a lot, but overcoming things that are happening inside your body that are invisible. I am able-bodied, so I haven't had much experience with that until now. And so I feel like oftentimes I get to practice this strength almost every day.
Many people who have been pregnant are nodding along right now. I imagine that. So I was only a witness to it twice up close, but definitely it fits the definition of strength.
I have seen my husband be very strong for this process, so I think that you also experienced that.
Well, great. Jaylee Jansen, thank you so much for joining us on Canvas of the Heart. We appreciate you so much. And for our listeners and viewers, like and subscribe. Also, visit Indigo Cultural Center. And while I'm thinking about it, when we air this, we're going to have that paper available. How can they find it from you?
Yes, I was going to chime in at the end. Please access the paper, share it around. We're going to share it on our personal website. If Free Arts is willing, they can share it. We can distribute it through listservs as well. And then we'll, at Indigo, have a small social media campaign as well to really get that out there. So visit us, visit Free Arts, and please take a read.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jaylee. We appreciated it. We learned a lot. And we'll see you all in the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Canvas of the Heart. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback by email at hello@freeartsaz.org. You can find more information about Free Arts by visiting our website at freeartsaz.org. We'd like to thank the many individual and corporate donors and the hundreds of volunteers that make Free Arts programs possible. Take care, and we will talk to you soon.